My son said.
Mom, you're not welcome for Christmas.
I put on my coat, got in the car, and called the bank.
Please cancel the automatic transfer paying my son's mortgage. Effective today.
Confirmed, ma'am.
Thank you.
5 years, $2,800 every month. Total $168,000, plus $47,000 for their down payment. $18,000 for the granite counters, curtains, hardwood, appliances I paid, my seat at their table. None, I'm not hinting. I'm stating facts. I financed that house, and they crossed my name off the guest list. From this minute forward, not one more dollar. I won't rant. I won't beg. I'm stopping the bleeding. If anyone decides to tell a neat little story about me being cold, I have bank statements, receipts, and dates. That was the first call. Next, I deal with the lies, the door pounding, and the smiling people who think consequences are for other families. Stay with me. I'll show you exactly how a mother ends a pattern cleanly. Tonight. I walked through Michael and Izzy's house like a quiet auditor. The silk curtains in the living room, my visa statement. April, the hardwood that creaks near the hallway, my second mortgage. Signed on 5th Street, the 12-foot tree, the glass ornaments, the extra strings of warm lights, store receipts in my glove box. Even the KitchenAid on the counter, color ice blue, bought during Izzy's baking phase that lasted 3 weeks, my card again. I can tell you prices without opening a folder. The granite slab, $18,000, the crown molding, another 2, the privacy curtains Izzy said she needed, nearly 1. I remember because I worked for every dollar and wrote every check. My name isn't on their mantle, not in the newer photos, but it is buried in their flooring and stitched into their upholstery. People think generosity fades. It doesn't. It settles into a house until you can't tell where love ends and financing begins. I looked around and thought, this is what I built for them. And then I remembered the sentence that told me exactly where I stood in it. Michael didn't raise his voice. He folded his hands, stared at the marble coffee table I helped him choose, and said it like a dentist reminder, Mom, you're not welcome for Christmas. Not angry, not ashamed, just scheduled. The words sat there between us, neat and clean. While a vanilla candle tried too hard to smell like comfort, he talked about their traditions, about how Izzy's parents prefer a certain atmosphere. He could not meet my eyes. I could. I watched my son shrink into the couch. I helped him pay off, and realized I had been shrinking for years so he wouldn't have to. I asked one question, where should I go? And he offered a reschedule the weekend after. Like love could be moved on a calendar when it became inconvenient. I felt something settle inside me then. Not rage, not drama. A decision. He finished his sentence. I started mine without saying a word. I stood, buttoned my coat, and walked past the framed photos where my face gets smaller the newer the year, past the coat closet holding Izzy's jackets, expensive and identical. At the door, I didn't make a scene. I don't do scenes, I said. Tell the hearts I said Merry Christmas, opened the door, and stepped into December air that felt honest. The house glowed behind me, a place I paid to warm. My phone buzzed as I reached the truck. I didn't look. I drove through streets I've paved with favors, utility bills, emergency repairs, childcare on short notice. I know every turn by the bills attached to it. When I reached home, my porch light flickered the way it's been flickering for months. I've put that bulb off because there was always a transfer coming on the 15th. I let the truck idle, hands on the wheel, and thought enough. I turned the engine off and listened to the silence of a woman who just closed one door and opened another. At the kitchen table, I brought out a yellow pad and a calculator older than some of Izzy's handbags. 5 years, $2,800 a month. That's $30,600 each year. 5 years makes $168,000 only the mortgage payments. Not the down payment, not the granite, not the new roof, not the landscaping that got their HOA off their backs. I wrote each number like a date I wouldn't forget. My husband's life insurance meant for comfort. Emergencies. A little travel went into someone else's Christmas china. The retirement savings I pretended I still had. That number was a memory with interest. I remembered the loan officer's polite eyes when I refinanced. Are you sure, Ms. Vera? Basavra, I was sure of my son. I was less sure of myself. I pushed the pad away and looked around my own house. The peeling paint, the draft at the window, the bulb that flickers. Money tells the truth even when people don't. I didn't need a speech. I needed a boundary and a phone call. I took out a manila folder I've been avoiding. Bank statements, transfers highlighted on the 15th. Wells Fargo Atatis, ending 7423. Credit card bills with Kendall Yards granite. Custom drapery, KitchenAid Pro. Receipts for throw pillows. I can't afford to lean on. I lined them up across the table like evidence. If someone asked who the victim was, the paper would point to me, no melodrama required. Every page carried two truths. I loved my son, and I erased myself to prove it. The folder had weight. I felt it in my arms and in my chest. People underestimate paper. It remembers without judgment. It will testify without stuttering. I stacked the statements by year, clipped them, and wrote totals on sticky notes. My house was quiet enough to hear the clip snap shut. That sound was small, but it felt like a lock turning. I didn't have to argue with anyone tonight. I could let the documents speak, and I could decide what to do next. The memory is bright fluorescent lights, a pen on a metal chain, a pamphlet about responsible borrowing. The loan officer asked, "Are you sure?" And I smiled the way women do when we've already promised something. I signed for a second mortgage to cover their down payment. I told myself it was an investment in family. Investments are supposed to earn returns. This one earned expectations. After that, the asks got easier to make and harder to refuse a new roof. Because buyers notice, counters, because image matters, furniture, because entertaining requires a look. I drank the coffee they offered and said yes until yes felt like oxygen. Sitting here now. I wish I had answered that first question differently, but regret won't make a single payment for me. Clarity will. I folded that memory up the way you fold a letter you don't need to reread. Tomorrow, I would answer a different question with a different word. Miguel used to leave notes on index cards and tape them where work began inside cabinet doors, under sink basins. Once on the back of a light switch, "Finish your edges," he'd write, like a blessing for tile and for life. The morning after his diagnosis, we stood in the garage between buckets of grout. He touched the rim of one, then my wrist. "Promise me," he said, voice steady like a level. "We'll help him start, not carry him." I hear that sentence when the house is quietest, when the heater clicks and the kettle answers. Help him start, not carry him. Grief turned those words into wet cement, and I pressed both hands into it until the shape looked like duty. The day we signed the second mortgage, I drove home with the radio off and found one of Miguel's old cards in the glove box, ink faded. Edges soft. Start is a gift. Carry becomes a story other people tell about you. I slid it into my purse and didn't read it again for 5 years. Tonight I opened the toolbox and it was there. Tucked under a tape measure, I held it by the corner the way you hold a photograph you don't want to smudge. We built kitchens that lasted because we respected foundations. We cut, checked, recut, because living crooked makes everything squeak. My love for my son isn't crooked. My fear was I set the card on the table beside the bank statements. "Finish your edges," it said from a decade ago. I pictured Miguel at a job site, running his palm along a seam, not to scold but to teach. "There," he'd say when it lay flat. I smoothed the card once, then picked up the phone. The promise wasn't broken by my no. It was finally kept. The next ring was Izzy. She starts soft, always does. "Elena, there was a misunderstanding," she said, voice sugar smooth, shopping bags rustling somewhere behind her. She explained traditions, tone, atmosphere, how her parents expect certain conversations. It wasn't personal, she said. It never is. When you're the one excluded, I listened without defending myself. I learned long ago that explaining your dignity to someone who needs you to explain it is its own humiliation. She shifted to logistics before I could respond, airport pickups. Timing, what shirt I might wear so her parents would feel comfortable. That word landed heavy. Comfortable is expensive, I thought, and I've already paid. I told her I'd take care of everything and ended the call. Then I turned my phone face down on the table. People hear mother and think limitless. They forget the word also means limit setter when the time comes. Mine had arrived, and it would sound like a simple request to a bank. Not race, Elena, class. That's what she said when I asked what exactly was wrong with my presence at her table. I'm 62. I don't need a glossary. I built a small business laying tile. One room at a time, so other families could feel proud of their kitchens. I paid taxes, hired people, kept my promises. I also cooked pots of beans big enough to feed whoever showed up, because that's how I was raised. If that doesn't fit her version of atmosphere, then atmosphere is a costume, not a value. She talked about art and literature as if my hands can't touch a book because they have touched grout. I remembered the Sundays she ate at my table and called my food comforting. Back then, comfort was welcome. Now, it embarrasses. I didn't argue with her. I don't debate my humanity. I let her finish her sentence and started composing my own. A sentence with dates, amounts, and 2 final words no one in that house expected effective immediately. That night, the porch light flickered again when I came home. I stood under it longer than usual. I have paid for so many lights to shine in other rooms. This one is mine, and it's been asking for my attention. Boundaries begin small, like replacing a bulb before you repair a roof. Papa. I unlocked the door, set my purse down, and wrote a short list call bank. Gather statements. Breathe. I'm not trying to make anyone hurt. I'm trying to stop hurting myself. Sometimes a moment isn't dramatic. It's a woman choosing her own house over someone else's approval. I turned the switch once more. The light steadied for a second, then flickered again. Message received. Morning, coffee. The account number written on an index card I keep in the drawer with measuring spoons. I dialed. Customer service. This is Jennifer. I gave the security answers I always remember and made the request I should have made a year ago. Please cancel the automatic transfer paying my son's mortgage. Effective immediately. She repeated it back to me. I said yes. She clicked a few keys and said it was done. No lecture, no pity. A normal transaction that felt like a major surgery. When we hung up, the heater clicked on and I realized my hands weren't shaking. I texted no one. I didn't need applause or permission. I looked at the calendar and circled the 15th of next month. For the first time in 5 years. That date belongs to me. 2 words effective immediately returned more warmth than any candle in their house. I gathered the old statements, the printed receipts, the reminders of every yes, and slid them into a fire-safe box not to burn. Not today, but to keep for when the stories start changing. Then I opened a window. The cold came in, clean and ordinary. I made eggs the way I like them and ate at my own table without checking my balance or my phone. It's strange, the shape of a first free morning. It looks exactly like any other coffee. A plate, a chair, until you realize you are not bracing for someone else's emergency. I washed the dish, wiped the counter, and finally replaced the porch bulb from the box in the hall closet. When the light came on steady, I didn't cry. I just nodded to the quiet woman in the glass and said, "Good. Next month, I'll paint the trim. Tonight, I will sleep. And when the phone rings with the next request, I will answer with what I should have said years ago, no." I took down the bottle I'd been saving for a celebration that never arrived, poured 2 fingers. No toast to them, just to the woman who finally learned to say no. It wasn't triumph, it was relief. The glass felt solid, earned. I thought of the nights I stayed up balancing bills so their lights could stay on. then of the single call that turned mine back on. I sipped and let the quiet sit with me like an old friend I'd ignored. Boundaries don't sound dramatic in a room this small. They sound like breathing that reaches the bottom of your lungs. I put the glass on a coaster and told myself out loud, "You did the right thing, not because it hurt them, but because it stopped hurting me." If someone wanted to call that cold, they didn't know how warmth is paid for by checks, by favors, by sleep. Tonight, I paid for warmth differently with a decision I won't be returning. I woke before the sun and ground fresh beans. The first scoop smelled like a room opening. No rush, no errands for someone else's emergencies. Just water, steam, the mug that fits my hand. Freedom doesn't throw a party. It tastes like coffee. You don't gulp on the way to a favor. I sat by the window and watched the street get its color back. A woman walked her dog in a red scarf. A school bus sighed and moved on. Normal, ordinary. I held the cup near my face and felt something steady. I am allowed to build a quiet life that doesn't apologize for itself. The list for the day was short laundry, a phone call, a new light bulb already handled. I wrote eggs, fruit, bread on a card and slipped it in my purse. When the phone buzzed, I didn't grab it. I took another sip. New rule, I don't run toward voices that never run toward me. Izzy called late morning. Bright voice, brisk rhythm. "Elena, quick thing, could you pick up my parents from the airport, Alaska? 447 baggage claim 3. Family helps family, right?" The phrase landed like an order wrapped in ribbon. I could hear her tapping a counter I paid for. She added notes about luggage, the shirt I might wear, their sensitivities after travel. I let her finish. Family does help. I thought it also respects. For 5 years, my help was money, time, rides, repairs provided without ceremony. Today, her help sounded like a job description. I said, "What airline?" She repeated the details, as if logistics were the only issue. She didn't ask about my plans. She didn't mention Christmas. She didn't say my name like I belonged to it. "Thank you," she said, but it wasn't a thank you. It was a confirmation. When the call ended, I wrote the flight number in the margin of my paper and underlined it. The line meant something different to me than to her. For her, an errand. For me, a test I already knew how to pass. I told her, of course, the way women do when we're buying time. After the call, I opened the newspaper to the crossword I'd left half done. 7 across delayed gratification. 12 letters. I counted the boxes and wrote postponement. It fit. I smiled at the neatness of it. Some truths ripen when you stop tugging on them. I brewed tea, set the timer for 4 minutes, and let the leaves decide their own pace. I thought about the airport's sliding doors, the wheels of suitcases, the small glances people give the person they assume is there to serve. I wasn't angry. I was curious about how it would feel not to sprint. The timer chimed. I poured the tea and watched the color settle. Postponement, I said softly, tasting the word. Not revenge, not a show. Just the quiet decision to delay my old habit, rushing to fix what disrespect breaks. The phone started its small, insistent dance. Izzy. Then unknown, then Izzy again. The vibration sounded like a wasp at the window, annoyed that the glass wouldn't move for it. I turned the phone face down, then all the way off. If someone needed help urgently, they could call a service they respect. My number is not a lever. I made a sandwich, sat at the table, and chewed without checking the screen. Halfway through, the house felt different, less like a station, and more like a home. I washed the plate, wiped the crumbs, and let the silence stand. It didn't accuse me. It congratulated me. I brewed Earl Grey and took the good mug, the one I used to save for guests. The sunlight slid across the floor like it had all the time in the world. I sat and tasted bergamot and calm. For the first time in a long while, quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a choice I could repeat. I thought of times I filled silence with errands to prove I was useful. Useful women don't get asked if they want a seat. they get asked to keep the table set. I pushed the thought aside and watched the steam curl off the cup. The phone had been still for 10 minutes, then 12, then 15. Peace has a clock. And today it ran on my schedule. I added hot water and decided the afternoon would belong to small, honest tasks: folding laundry, walking to the mailbox, oiling the squeaky hinge on the back door. The pounding started just before dusk, hard, entitled, not a knock, but a demand. I knew who it was before I looked Chuck Hart's temper, Catherine's posture, Izzy's impatience sharpened by embarrassment. I opened the door and they pushed past like they lived here. They spoke over each other, the flight, the wait, the taxi, the humiliation. Chuck's face was crimson. Catherine's voice carried years of practice, telling people where they belong. Izzy used my first name like it was a reprimand. They walked into my living room, the space I dusted and warmed, and filled it with their storm. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I let them tumble out their list of grievances until the list ran out of breath. I watched them look for the old version of me, the one who apologizes first and asks questions later. She didn't come to the door. When the noise paused, I stepped forward and found my voice exactly where I'd left it years ago. "This is my house," I said, and I want you out now." Chuck pointed a finger he didn't dare land. Catherine started a sentence that assumed compliance. Izzy tried to turn it back into logistics. I didn't raise my tone. I opened the door wider and held the space. Authority doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it sounds like a woman who has paid every bill in a room and finally collects what's owed respect. They hesitated, then moved angry, offended, surprised. The latch clicked behind them. My shoulders dropped an inch I didn't know they'd been holding. From the porch, Chuck leaned in with that country club calm men wear like a suit. "You'll regret this. We have connections." "We'll make this public," Catherine nodded. Izzy added, "People will hear what you did." I looked at them and thought, good. Sunshine is fair. Do what you need to. I said, "I'll do the same." They expected a plea. They got permission. The rental car doors slammed. Tires scraped the curb. The street took them back. Inside, I locked the deadbolt and made a note on my pad if they go public. I go factual. The house exhaled. It's funny how a space can feel cleaner without anyone touching a thing. No perfume, no talk layered over talk, just the hum of the heater and the sound of my own steps. I picked up the frames on the console, dusted them, and set them back with the faces straight. I watered the plant I'd neglected. The quiet wasn't empty, it was accurate, without their noise. I could hear what the room had been trying to tell me. You live here. You choose what enters. You choose what leaves. 3 days later, my face showed up on page 3 of the Spokane Review. Local woman abandons elderly couple at airport during holiday storm. I put my coffee down and read every word twice. They had the flight number right and everything else polished for effect. Storm, it was 52 degrees and sunny. Elderly couple Chuck and Catherine are younger than some of my neighbors who shovel their own snow. The quotes were tidy, the timeline convenient. I felt the old urge to explain. Then I felt something steadier: document. I clipped the page, wrote the actual temperature in the margin, and circled the claims that would be easiest to disprove. If they wanted a story, we would give one accurate, dated, signed. The piece called My Behavior Erratic, hinted at decline, suggested I'd snapped. Women my age know those words. They're the lazy way to dismiss a boundary. I brewed fresh coffee and opened my folder. Facts don't raise their voices, they repeat. I laid out bank statements by year, receipts by category, transfers highlighted in yellow. I stuck a note to the article context omitted 5 years of financial support. I didn't feel fury, I felt focus. They wanted me to run around swatting at rumors. I would stand still and stack truth. I turned on the laptop and began. Search the names, note the roles, map the connections, Chuck's clubs, Catherine's charities, Izzy's posts, Michael's recent activity on LinkedIn. Screenshots saved to a folder named Record. This wasn't spying, it was housekeeping. When people stage a narrative about you, clean your side of the street and keep invoices. I opened a fresh document and typed a heading, timeline support and public claims. First entry, the second mortgage date. Last entry, the article date. The game wasn't mine, but the board was. I didn't shout into the wind. I called the desk that prints it. Features. This is Patricia. Her voice had the glide of someone used to arranging other people's reputations like centerpieces. Good afternoon, I said. I'm the woman in your page 3 story. I'm requesting a formal correction and a right of reply. The line went quiet for 2 seconds, the sound of a script losing a prop. We stand by our reporting, she offered. Wonderful, I said. Then you'll want my documents. I'm emailing a statement, 12 pages, with exhibits A through H. Please assign a reference number. I could almost hear her posture change. One moment. Okay. Case 24 Walafamonsantisfras. I kept my tone even, the way Miguel used to test a level, and wait for the bubble to settle. To be clear, I continued. Your story states holiday storm. The National Weather Service logged 52 degrees and clear skies at 3:15 p.m. Exhibit C. You labeled the couple elderly. Their public bios list ages 56 and 58. Exhibit Dist. You implied erratic behavior. Exhibit A is a 5-year ledger of on-time transfers, utilities covered, and renovations paid by me. Those facts matter because they alter motive. She cleared her throat. We can review a letter to the editor. Not a letter, I said, a correction and a right of reply, 1 column wide. Same page position, Sunday edition. If you decline, I'll staple this packet to every place setting at their Christmas table and let the room be your ombudsman. Silence again, then please send the materials. I hit send subject line, request for correction. Factual errors and omitted context, PDFs attached. Certified hard copy prepared. Tracking number written on my pad. I wasn't chasing vindication. I was finishing an edge. Miguel would have approved, set the tile. Wipe the line. Let the grout cure. Truth doesn't panic. It hardens. I printed photographs Izzy had posted the kitchen reveal. The vacation they took the same month I paid their utilities. The so grateful caption under a table I financed. I stapled each image to the relevant bill. Granite to granite. Flights to overdue notices. Holiday decor to my transfer on the 15th. People say receipts like slang. I mean the real kind ink, totals, vendor names. I added the down payment check copy, the roof contractor invoice, the furniture store statement. Then I totaled the numbers like I was building a staircase solid. Step by step, no wobbles. If anyone asked me for proof, I wouldn't point, I'd hand it to them. Michael's LinkedIn showed a new connection, Patricia Monroe, lifestyle editor at The Review. I clicked. Read her bio, 15 years in local features. No banking beat. I checked mutuals. There they were, 2 names I recognized from Chuck's golf photos. Stories don't fall from the sky. They're placed by hands with reasons. I noted the dates connection made. Call likely placed. Article published and drew a thin line across my page. I didn't need to call anyone names. The line was enough. Influence leaves fingerprints even when people wear gloves. I cleared the table and laid out the next steps like meal prep. Organize statements by year. Print 12 packets, 1 for each person who would sit at their Christmas table. Attach the article with my notes in red lie, false, missing context. Prepare a short, calm statement. No shouting, no threats, just the story. With amounts and dates, page numbered and clipped. If they wanted public, I would do public correctly, not gossip, record, not shame, clarity. I slid the first packet into a folder and wrote a date on the tab, December 24th. Then I circled it, once. I set the printer to collate 12 copies, double-sided, stapled. Each packet held the same spine down payment, monthly transfers, renovations, Utilities followed by photographs and the article. I slid every set into a clear sleeve so pages wouldn't curl when hands began to shake. I labeled them by seat, head of table, right, left, down the line. I imagined each plate, each napkin ring, each wineglass catching candlelight. Fine, let it be beautiful. Truth doesn't mind crystal. I stacked the 12 folders in my briefcase and checked the clasp twice. 12 guests, I said softly, like a host counting place settings. Except tonight, the menu changes. Every fork will meet a fact. Every smile will meet a date and an amount. I wasn't planning a scene. I was planning a standard. You cannot invite a lie to dinner and expect it to behave. I zipped the case, stood up straight, and turned off the printer. One last count 12, one for every seat, one for every story they had told. I opened the newspaper to page 3 and took out a red pen. Not rage clarity. I circled holiday storm and wrote in the margin 52 due of. Sunny. I underlined elderly couple and added their ages. Younger than me. I bracketed erratic and wrote 5-year payment history attached. Red travels fast on white, and tonight I needed speed and precision. I flipped through each packet, marking the same notes in the same places, so every reader would arrive at the same truth on the same line. Misinformation multiplies in silence. Mark it, date it, move on. When I finished, my fingers were smudged crimson. I looked at them and thought of all the years I bled quietly into other people's comfort. No more. This ink wasn't anger, it was boundary. It said, here is where the story stops pretending. I capped the pen and tucked it beside the packets. A small tool with a big job: underline what matters, cross out what doesn't, and leave no room for confusion. I pressed the navy suit I wore to Miguel's funeral and laid the jacket on the bed. Back then, it carried goodbye to the man I loved. Today, it carried goodbye to the woman who endured. I chose a simple blouse, low heels I could stand in, no jangling jewelry to distract from my words. I pinned my hair away from my face the way I did for every job that required focus. In the mirror, I saw a mother, yes, but also a professional who knows her value. I slipped the house keys into one pocket and a small pack of tissues into the other. You never know whose hands will shake tonight. Maybe theirs, maybe mine. I touched the porch light switch once. It held steady. Good. I picked up the briefcase and tested the weight. Manageable. I looked around my quiet home, fresh bulb, clean counter, chair pushed in and told it I'd be back for a late cup of tea. Then I locked the door behind me and walked to the car without hesitation. Some farewells deserve ceremony. This one deserved resolve. The streets to Kendall Yards were familiar. I'd driven them with casseroles, toolboxes, and checks. Tonight, I brought paper and a promise to myself. The neighborhood glowed, tidy and sure of itself. Their house was brightest on the block, lights strung straight, wreath centered, pathway cleared. I parked across the street and watched silhouettes move behind the dining room glass. Laughter carried even with the window closed. It stung for a second, then settled into something steady recognition. I had funded this glow. I put the car in park, turned the key, and sat still. No shaking hands, no second guessing. I reached for the briefcase, set it on the passenger seat, and said what I needed to hear. You don't need anyone's permission to tell the truth. Then I stepped out into the evening, crisp and ordinary, and crossed the street. The front door was, as always, unlocked. Safety is easiest for people who've never been corrected. I eased it open and stepped into warmth I recognized, and a smell I had paid for: roast, butter, a hint of cinnamon, coats on hooks, shoes lined up, a small mountain of gift bags near the stairs, a perfect picture of welcome for everyone but me. I closed the door softly behind me and smoothed the front of my jacket. Voices floated from the dining room, silverware chimed, someone complimented the centerpiece. I walked past family photos where my face shrank with each new frame. The house did not resist me. Why would it? Money leaves no footprints. I reached the archway and waited for a lull in the conversation. Hosts love a pause. It lets them perform. I don't perform. I entered. 12 faces lifted at once, surprise, irritation, calculation. Izzy froze with a glass halfway up. Michael went pale. Chuck's jaw worked, already forming the script. He prefers authority first, facts later. I set the briefcase on the sideboard like any guest, setting down a casserole and clicked it open. Good evening, I said. Steady. I won't stay long. I'm not here to eat. I'm here to clear the table. I took out the first packet and placed it in front of the woman nearest me. Bank statements. Dates highlighted. Another packet. Another place setting. Down payment. Transfers. Invoices. I moved clockwise. Not rushing, not dragging. Your newspaper, I added, laying the clipped article in the center, my red notes visible. Someone at the far end coughed. Silverware stopped. If you're going to tell my story, I said, meeting eyes as I rounded the corner, you should have the facts. I reached Michael last. I set his packet down gently. Especially you. Paper rustled, chairs adjusted. People who had expected dessert found documentation instead. I set my palm lightly on the first folder, a host's gesture with a different menu. On page 1, I said, steady, you'll see the second mortgage date and amount. That's the spine. I moved to the next setting. Page 2 shows the 15th every month, 2,800 leaving my account for 5 years. I let the number stand in the air before I walked on. Page 3 covers renovations and utilities. Vendor names, totals, dates. Chuck cleared his throat. The prelude to a speech. I lifted a hand, polite but firm. You'll have your turn. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I slid a packet to the woman with pearls and said, you might start with the red notes on the article. Weather, ages, wording. She nodded without meaning to. Izzy reached for Michael's wrist like she could steer his reaction. I set his copy directly in front of him, square to his plate. Start at the top. Michael, I said, gentler. Don't skip. His eyes tracked the highlights like they were roads he'd driven without reading the signs. Catherine stared at totals as if numbers were a dialect she'd never learned. I gave her the contractor invoice with the granite photo stapled to it. Granite to granite, I said. It helps. A guest at the far end whispered, is this all verified? I tapped the stack. Bank statements, canceled checks, invoices. If you need originals, I have them. I placed my pen on the sideboard. Cap off. In case anyone wanted to circle a date they pretended not to see. I didn't come to embarrass you, I said to the room. I came to correct the record you made public. I stepped back so everyone could read without my shadow across their pages. A mother can feed a crowd many ways. Tonight, I served portions you must chew facts, measured and warm. Take your time, I added. Truth digests better when you don't rush. Someone near the centerpiece squinted at the word storm. Was it really that cold? He asked, almost to himself. I took my phone out, tapped the date, showed the temperature log 52, clear. A guest pulled up photos from that afternoon, no snow, no coats. Another murmured, this says elderly, but... and looked at Catherine's high heels and Chuck's tanned hands. I didn't smirk. Verification is not victory, it's maintenance. I pointed to a line on page 2. This is the 15th of every month, I said. $2,800 leaving my account, someone whispered. For 5 years and the whisper traveled, I could feel the table tilt just a degree toward the side of reality. Stories are easy, I said. Records are work. I let the silence do its job. It did. Michael finally found his voice. Then at first, Mom, I didn't know about the article. He wouldn't look at Izzy. She wouldn't look at him. I kept my eyes on him and softened my tone. Your wife knew. Her parents made sure it was printed. He swallowed. The room waited, forks hovering like they were listening too. For a second, I saw my boy as he was kind. Unsure, too quick to please the loudest person in the room. I wanted to rescue him from his own choices. I didn't. Boundaries mean you let grown people meet the edge of their actions. "Mom," he said, smaller. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "I hear you." The words were true and not yet enough. I stayed standing. He sat lower. I closed the briefcase and smoothed my jacket. "That's all I came to say," I told the room. "Enjoy your dinner." I looked at the lights, the stemware, the carefully folded napkins. It's the last one I pay for. No drama, no slammed doors. I left the remaining copies on the sideboard for late arrivals and turned toward the hallway. Behind me, voices rose questions, defenses, the sudden clatter of a performance losing its lines. I didn't turn back. At the doorway, I paused just long enough to breathe once, deep and even, then stepped into the cooler air of the entryway. The front door opened easily. I closed it gently and felt the latch catch, outside. It was quiet enough to hear my heels on the path. I had come empty-handed and left them full of facts. That was enough. I reached the sidewalk before the sound changed, behind the glass. Voices rose sharp, layered, off-key. A chair scraped. Someone said my name like a challenge. Someone else said, "Look at the dates." I didn't need to see it. I've lived long enough to recognize the sound of masks hitting the floor. They clatter before they crack. I stood by my car, hand on the door, and listened for a moment to the new music of that house. There's questions where there used to be compliments. Silence where there used to be certainty. It wasn't joy. It was justice doing its quiet work. I got in, started the engine, and let the heater warm the steering wheel. The street was still dressed for holidays. Twinkle lights, wreaths, porch boughs, but my season had already turned. People think Christmas is just about welcome. Sometimes it's about truth arriving right on time. I pulled away slowly, not to make a point, just to leave. The best carol of the night was Simple Pretense, finally out of tune. The week after felt nothing like a standoff. Cold wars freeze you in place. This was heat returning to a room I pay to keep warm. Calls stacked up Izzy's numbers, blocked, unknown numbers, ignored, Michael's name, saved for later. I didn't narrate my silence to anyone. I made soup, folded laundry, and swept the kitchen. Every ordinary task felt like proof I can live without being on call for someone else's plans. I walked the block in the good coat I never wore because I was always rushing to be practical. The neighbor with the golden retriever waved. We talked about the frost lifting from the grass. No one needed my side of the story to offer kindness back home. I cleaned the junk drawer, the old batteries, the pens that don't write, a stack of takeout menus from the years I was too tired to cook for myself after cooking for everyone else. I kept one menu and threw the rest away. In the afternoon, I opened a small box by the bed programs from holidays I wasn't invited to attend. Thank you cards that read like receipts. I kept 2, the ones with real ink smudges, and recycled the rest. I unfollowed the accounts that made me feel like a ghost in rooms I paid to decorate. I brewed tea and deleted 3 unsent messages explaining myself. Explanations feed stories that want to eat you. At night, I read until my eyes settled. When the ache crept in, the part that still wanted an invitation, I named it, set it on the nightstand, and turned off the lamp. Peace wasn't empty. It was active. I slept through. On Thursday, I brought the step stool to the door and unscrewed the old bulb. I'd had the new one in a drawer for months. It took less than a minute turn. Click, done. The light came up steady and stayed. I stood there longer than necessary, not for drama, but because small repairs deserve witness. I thought about how many lights I'd fixed for other people, with a ladder and a smile, calling it help when it was really a way to be useful enough to keep a place at the edge of their table. This bulb was different. It didn't beg, it asked, and I answered. I swept the mat, shook out the little evergreen wreath, and took a picture of the doorway proof to myself that home recognizes me when I show up for it. The light didn't make a speech. It did its job. So would I. I went to the store with a simple list and no calculations about the 15th. Eggs, berries, good bread, the yogurt I like even when it's not on sale. I added a small bunch of flowers yellow, nothing fancy, and tucked them beside the milk. My cart looked like a person's, not a project, in line. A woman ahead of me chatted about a recipe and asked if I'd tried it. I wrote the name down. We shared a smile that didn't cost either of us anything. Back home, I washed the fruit and placed the flowers in a jar near the sink. I ate without hurry, cleaned up without resentment, and sat for a minute at the table I could finally call mine in more than a legal sense. Learning to feed yourself again isn't a luxury. It's a boundary with forks. Rosa texted, "Come for Sunday dinner. The kids want to show you their projects." I brought tortillas and a jar of salsa I made earlier in the week. When I walked in, someone yelled. Elena, like the sound itself, was a hug. Coats landed on the same hook and nobody checked labels. The table stretched with what we had, not what we had to prove. We passed bowls, interrupted each other with stories, and thanked whoever reached the salt. No one asked about articles. No one asked me to explain my worth. I held Rosa's smallest grandchild while the older ones argued about glitter. I laughed at a joke that didn't need a degree to be funny. On the way out, Rosa pressed leftovers into my hands with a look that said, "Don't argue. Family is where the invite comes without an invoice, and the chair is yours, whether or not you brought a centerpiece." I drove home with the windows fogged from warm food and felt full in the right places. On Monday, an old client left a voicemail, saw something in the paper, then heard the other thing, for what it's worth. I believe the woman who showed up on time and did the job right, a former coworker wrote. Proud of you for setting a boundary. At the market, a neighbor said, lightly, "You know, the weather was gorgeous that day." And we both smiled because truth can be gentle when you let it. Reputation is fragile when you build it on rooms where you perform. It is sturdy when you build it on work people remember. I didn't post. I didn't clap back. I saved the messages and added them to a small folder labeled kindness. Because record keeping isn't just for bills. The lies didn't vanish. They stopped multiplying. That's what sunlight is for, not spectacle clarity. If anyone asked me how to repair a name, I would hand them 2 tools, time and facts. Jobs began to fill the calendar again. A backsplash repair for Mrs. Wilcox. Regrouting a shower for the couple on Lincoln. Modest, honest work that smells like clean water and dries slow. I showed up with my toolkit and my own keys, not to anyone's house, but to my day. On break, I ate the sandwich I packed and watched the light move across tile I laid straight. Dignity, I've learned, is quiet. It's a fair price on an invoice and a handshake that doesn't check your last name. I went home with tired hands and a clear mind. No emergency transfers, no surprise errands, just a shower, soft socks, and a phone that didn't own me. The pages turned December's red, January's clean edges, February's short insistence, and then March arrived with mail that mattered. A certified letter addressed to Michael and Izzy notice of default. I read it the way you read weather from another state reel, but not mine to prepare for. I brewed tea, opened a window, and let spring air test the room. Buds on the tree out back showed green at the tips. Seasons don't ask permission to change. Neither do boundaries once they're rooted. I set the letter aside and picked up my book. Somewhere across town, consequences had their own calendar. Here, in my small, steady house. I had one too. New rule for this season, I don't chase storms that someone else ordered. I water what's growing. The certified letter arrived with a green slip and a knock that startled the afternoon. I signed for it, set it on the counter, and finished rinsing my cup before I opened it. Notice of default 3 months late. 14 days to cure. The wave of reality came right on schedule. The one they said would never reach their shore. I read every line the way I've read invoices slowly, once through for meaning, again for numbers, dates, amounts, consequences that don't need adjectives. I folded the paper along its creases and put it back in the envelope. It wasn't cruel to feel nothing. It was accurate. My name wasn't on that mortgage. My money had been past tense. I made a small note in my calendar March, letter received, and underlined it. Then I opened the window and let air move the curtain. Life kept its steady beat, a dog barked, a truck downshifted, the kettle clicked off. Reality doesn't hate you. It just keeps the books. I set the envelope on the table like weather from another state reel. But distant, interesting cloud shapes. No umbrella required here. I brewed tea, added honey, and carried it to the chair by the window. I used to feel responsible for every forecast within driving distance, as if my worry could keep a roof from leaking. Today, I recognized the old pull and let it pass. If they wanted to live above their means, they also had to live with the sky above their house. I took a sip and watched a child ride a scooter. His father jogging behind. Not my problem wasn't cold, it was boundary. I am allowed to enjoy a cup of tea that doesn't have to cool while I fix someone else's weather. I moved the letter to a file titled For Records, slid it beside utilities and taxes, and closed the drawer. Order is its own mercy. Dusk softened the room when the second knock came hesitant. Not like the pounding from December. I knew that cadence. Michael. He stood on the porch thinner, tired around the eyes. Suit wrinkled in a way that said he'd sat in the car rehearsing. Mom, he started, voice careful. Can we talk? 3 months is long enough for a person's pride to bend without breaking. I opened the door and stepped aside. He entered like he wasn't sure his feet were allowed on the rug. I made coffee because my hands need something to do when truth is near. We sat, not at a lawyer's table, not as opponents, just as two people who had lost time and were deciding whether to lose more. He looked at the light I'd fixed and the fresh paint on the trim and said, quietly, "It looks good, Mom." I nodded. "It feels good." Sometimes that's all the preface a hard conversation requires, a small compliment that proves the door is open, not the past. He started in fits and starts, the way adults apologize when the wound is older than the words. I'm sorry about Christmas, about the article, about everything. He pressed his palms together, like he was holding something breakable. I didn't know they called the paper. I should have defended you. I should have. He stopped before the list turned into a shield. I let him finish each sentence without rescuing him from the silence after it. Apologies need room to stand up straight. I hear you, I said, and I appreciate you saying it to my face. He nodded, eyes wet, the kind of tears people get when they stop arguing with reality. I want to make it right, he said. I don't know how. I folded my hands around my mug. Some things you can't fix. I answered gently, but you can stop repeating them. Forgiveness would come, I knew that, but I would not hand it to the habit that hurt me and call that love. He asked about the money, like someone asking for the weight of a stone they've carried without looking. I gave him the number, $237,468, I said, clear. Mortgage payments, down payment, renovations, utilities. The room took it in before he did. Numbers don't negotiate, they land. He looked at the table as if the wood might explain it back to him. How did I not? He stopped. There's no elegant verb for ignoring what feeds you. I slid the small calculator toward him, not to make him do math, but to let him touch the thing that kept count while I stopped counting myself. He tapped nothing. He just rested his hand there. I used your father's insurance, I said, steady. And what I saved for days I thought would be gentler than these. I told myself it was temporary, then temporary learned my address. He winced, a quiet sound I recognized from skinned knee days. I waited. I can't repay that, he said finally. I'm not billing you, I answered. I'm telling you the truth so we don't keep living a lie. Debts aren't only dollars, they're habits. He nodded, eyes on the porch light glowing through the window. Unpaid for, simple. I'll make changes, he whispered. Good, I said. Start with today. Call the lender. Sell what you can't afford. Learn to want less. I pushed the calculator back to my side of the table and set it atop the folder. I added it up last month, I told him, and then I stopped subtracting myself. I forgave you months ago, I told him, and watched surprise cross his face like sun through cloud. Forgiveness is for my heart. It keeps me from living angry, but it isn't a reset button. He waited. I continued. Forgiveness doesn't restore old access. It doesn't reopen my wallet. It doesn't erase the need for trust to be rebuilt the slow way by choices, not speeches. He nodded, and I saw relief and grief share a chair. So what does it mean then, he asked. It means I don't wish you harm, I said. I wish you wisdom, and I will not fund your learning. The words didn't slam, they settled. He took a breath that sounded like a man finding ground that would hold him, even if it was harder than the cushion he'd known. Some truths comfort and correct in the same sentence. If we're going to build anything, I said, the foundation is respect. I listed the posts like fence lines. You speak to me with dignity, even when you disagree. You don't use me as leverage with your wife or her parents. You don't ask for money. You show up when you say you will. You protect my name in rooms I'm not invited into. He listened, not arguing the fence, just nodding at each post. That's a lot, he said, small smile, not bitter honest. It's basic, I answered, and let the word be kind. Families need mile markers, not handcuffs. Boundaries keep love inside the yard. He looked at his hands and said, I can do that. We would see. But the promise sounded like someone measuring twice before cutting once. He asked about the house the way people ask about a ship they know is taking on water quietly. Hoping for a miracle. What should I do, he said. I shook my head. That's a grown man's problem. Michael, not cruel. True. Sell it. Rework the loan. Move. Get a job that pays the bills you have, not the life you wish you had. His face flickered with pride, fear, then resolve. Okay, I didn't offer a plan. I didn't call a contact. I didn't soften the edges with a check. Lessons bought for me will not be resold. He stood taller by an inch that didn't belong to me. Good. At the door, he paused, hand on the frame, not ready to step back into the weather he made. For what it's worth, he said, eyes finally clear. On Christmas, when you walked in there and told the truth, I was proud of you. The words were simple, and they reached a room in me that still holds his kindergarten drawings. Shame and pride can sit together if the chairs are sturdy. Thank you, I said, and meant it. He swallowed, nodded, and added, I want to be the kind of man you don't have to rescue. I smiled. Small. That would be a gift to both of us. He stepped onto the porch. The light caught his shoulder. For a second, he looked younger not because time reversed, but because responsibility makes people look like themselves again. He waved once and left. I poured a finger of the good whiskey and took it to the back steps. The air had that spring mix cold in the shade, warm on the cheekbones. The woods smelled faintly of oak and rain. I watched the yard hold its small promises buds fattening. A bird bossing everyone from the fence. Freedom, I decided, tastes like something aged right and poured carefully. Not a party, a presence. I clinked the glass against the railing once, a private little ceremony, and took a slow sip. My life fits in this quiet. It always did. I was just busy furnishing someone else's. My phone buzzed with Rose's name Sunday. The kids want to show you their projects. I smiled before I typed. Wouldn't miss it. No performance, no invoice, just a chair with my name that no one erases. I set the phone down and pictured her table mismatched plates, too many hands passing the same bowl. A story starting before another one ends. I'll bring tortillas, maybe a pie if I have time. I don't need to impress. I need to belong. That has always been the point. I washed the single glass I'd used and left it to dry on a towel, feeling the sweetness of plans that don't demand a costume. Some families measure love in price tags. Ours measures it in chairs set without counting. I made a list I actually wanted to keep: morning walk before the neighborhood stirs, the good coffee on Tuesdays, just because, fresh flowers on paydays, a phone that sleeps in the kitchen, dinner at the table. Even when it's only me. I took photos of small things: sun on the sink, steam off soup, a book closed with a ribbon where I left off. Rituals don't need witnesses to count. They need repetition. I bought a calendar and wrote in ink: dentist, oil change, rosas, rest. Not maybe, not if they don't need me. My name belongs on my own schedule. I cleared a shelf and put the briefcase there, not as a threat, but as proof. If stories start slipping again, I won't raise my voice. I'll raise the file. And then I'll return to the life that keeps growing where I water it. Before bed, I stood at the doorway and looked at the porch light, on steady. I made a promise out loud so I couldn't pretend I hadn't. No more tickets to shows where I'm not welcome on stage. I don't buy entry with rent money or affection. I don't audition for a seat at a table I set. If love is in the room, it will keep a chair for me. If not, I have a house that knows my name when I put the key in the lock. I turned the light off, not as a metaphor, just as a woman going to sleep safe, tired and free in the ways that matter. Tomorrow, I'll wake up and keep the promise. That is how a life changes: one clear, no held. Real Family sets a chair for you without attaching a bill. If there's a price tag on your presence, it isn't love, it's a contract you never signed. I learned that late, and I paid tuition in dollars. Tears and years I forgive, because carrying anger is heavy, and I'm done lifting what isn't mine. But I keep my boundaries, because peace needs walls the way a garden needs a fence. If this story touched something in you, maybe a quiet yes you've been afraid to say. Tell me about it. What boundary did you set this year? Was it a dollar amount you stopped paying, a door you decided not to walk through, a voice you finally answered with no? Your moment might be the line another woman needs to see. Thank you for spending this hour with me. If you want more true, ordinary stories about repair, respect, and the kind of love that doesn't erase you, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs permission to choose themselves tonight. And when you set the table, leave a chair open with your name on it. Then sit down. You belong there. Comment your boundary moment, subscribe, and share.